everyone, Alex here, and welcome to episode 88 of The Coach's Journey. In this episode, I'm joined by Philip Crocker, an executive coach, consultant, facilitator, and host of the Alongside a podcast. From wanting to understand what motivated people while running a cleaning and support services business, Philip shares what he learned from launching several successful businesses before training as a coach and coach supervisor, an experience he described as a brilliant illumination. I really loved our conversation with Philip. We go from sort of the abstract aspects of what coaching is to the practical parts of running a successful coaching business. In particular, I love how Philip weaves together threads from physics and human relationships, ideas of complexity and simplicity, and he shares this idea of conductivity to describe ways to increase the flow of energy between people in coaching conversations or in our business in much the same way as electrical circuits. We also talk about Philip's idea of the alongside-er and the coach's role as an alongside-er. We look at how to grow coaching client base that is full of people not only that help us grow our business, but we need to learn and develop. We talk about slowing down when finding our niche and how to navigate towards it. We look at the power of coaching to help people fall in love with themselves more. And right at the end, Philip talks about how he uses the OKR methodology to guide how he runs his coaching business. So as I say, ranging from the abstract to the practical, the simple to the complex, I really love talking to Philip and hearing the many years of insight that he's picked up over his career. So I hope you enjoy as much as I did the conversation with Philip. So without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce you to Philip Crocker. Philip Crocker, welcome to the Coach's Journey podcast.
Well, it's very, very good of you to have me along.
Absolute pleasure, Philip. I think obviously we've known each other through university, which we might talk about. But you were one of the people I was really keen to get on early on as a host. So how are you? Where do we find you today?
We are trying to move a house, which has taken 2 years and 4 months. So this has been an exercise in patience, which if you ask my Mrs. Crocker, you'll know that's not necessarily one of my stronger suits. But I think actually I am learning patience is an important aspect of getting things done and being alongside, etc., etc. So anyway, I think we're almost there, and then we'll be in a new place.
Well, best of luck, and I'm sure at some point we might come back to patience today. And it's probably, actually, as you say, it's an interesting ingredient in change and creating change. But when we're thinking about coaching, Philip, I mean, where did you first come across coaching?
So it's not a quick answer. Well, not a very quick answer, if that's all right. But I, if I go right back, I started life at HSBC, which was known as the Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation, which is what HSBC stands for, but nobody uses the long term now. And I joined what was effectively, although it predated it, the sort of graduate program, although I wasn't a graduate at the time. I did 3 years in Paris, in London, Paris, and Singapore, and came back. And it didn't really agree with me. I wasn't very well in Singapore, and ultimately I left the bank. And it was one of those, and this is a little bit of a theme, is what do you do next? What do you want to do? And it was suggested that I go to university, which I didn't particularly want to do, but I did. I did marketing and international marketing and French. And I did half a degree. And I really couldn't cope with being right back at the beginning again. I've been talking to a few people about this, and it was quite difficult. I found that to the whole learning thing. Anyway, I did the first half, did the exams, and decided to leave. And I joined a guy who had two cardboard boxes and a telephone, and he just started a cleaning company, a contract cleaning company, in London and the City of London. And he had some contracts. And this is a brilliant thing from a business point of view, and it's something you don't necessarily have with coaching, by the way. As you knew, next month we had £250,000 worth of income coming in. This was in the 80s, so it was actually quite an amount. We gradually built that up. and turned it into a support services business, which was contracts, cleaning, and other things, building, maintenance, and what have you, and security, guarding. We work with all the main property consultants, CBRE, Jones Lang LaSalle, etc. So I learned to do that, and we sold it. I was intrigued what would motivate somebody to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and go and clean an office block with 30 cleaners who were being paid a pittance pretty much. So I brought a psychologist in to look at that from an aspect of leadership. And that's really where the people-y side of business, my interest was sparked. We sold that, and I started another business, same sort of contrast, but with banks, building societies, financial services, and this thing called the internet was coming in. The banks wouldn't touch it with a barge pole at the time. Took a month to sort out the problem we were dealing with, which was distressed assets, basically. And then by the time we finished, which was 8 years later, we'd re-engineered the process using the internet. It took 24 hours to get the property ready to be on to go on the market to be sold, and all the reporting was on the cloud. So we were a bit ahead of the game in a way because we'd used the technology in that sort of application to share information in an efficient way. And I learned so much from that. So I learned by applying knowledge. Some people love knowledge for the sake of it, which is just a preference, I think, and there might be a mixture depending upon the context. We sold that, and I started a marketing business, which is really about people in one business, getting to know people in another business, and understanding their needs and reconciling that difference and seeking to meet those needs. It's called marketing, business development. And 14 years ago, I was ill out of the blue, actually. I had cancer and this and that. And I had 4 months off and a time to think, well, what do you really like doing? Another little pause, what next sort of thing. And I added this thing called coaching. A very long way of getting to your answer, by the way, your question, but it gives a bit of context. And it was a real light bulb because it's this thing about motivation of the other, but you've got to understand yourself. So I did 3 years, had some fantastic training with a company which sadly doesn't exist really anymore. Dr. Sally Vanson ran it, called the Performance Solution. And it was just the right training for me. It was very international. There were lots of international coaches on it who were all starting. Some of them became friends. And I ultimately did coach supervision. I did the final thing, which meant writing an essay, which is something I don't particularly like doing, but I did do it. And I am a coach supervisor as well. But I think the thing that really motivated was this thing. The nuns said to me when I was very, very young, at my very first school, they said to my parents, well, he might be quite good with his hands. Because my twin sister was streets ahead academically and everything else. And they were wrong about that too, because you do not want me to put your shed up for you, because it will fall down, I assure you. So, and I think it took until this adding the coaching thing for me sort of to really find the place that I wanted to be. And it was this place where you could come alongside someone and help them belong, help them understand themselves more, be more aware of themselves in the context that they find themselves. Because it's not all about me or us individually. It's about how the whole thing works together systemically. So I coaching has been a brilliant illumination for me. But I think the thing that it's really done is really highlighted my awareness of how all things work together in a systemic way. And I've added, more quantum mechanics and stuff to all of this stuff, where we begin to see this interdependence. And I think that's often the focus of the coaching that I work in. I don't know, did I answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, there's now so many places to go with that. But I think I'll come back to the alongside thing because I think it's really interesting. Is also the way of thinking about coaching. But I was interested. So those 14 years ago, when you first you began that coaching training, what was it that put coaching on your map, as it were?
Well, I think fun enough, the first thing was somebody mentioned NLP, neuro linguistic programming, but actually before that, it was something that happened. I was working for a building company, construction company, and we were bidding for a significant piece of work. This is in the southeast, and we were waiting for our turn to go in and view the premises as part of the evaluation of the proposal. And this van minibus turned up, and these guys bounced out literally of this minibus, and they were almost sort of skipping actually into this place because they were going for the presentation to the client with what we're going to do, which is what we were going to do. But we happened to be early, and we saw them go out. Anyway, funnily enough, they won the contract. Anyway, and I found out the person who organised the whole thing. I said, who are they? And said, where did they come from? And as it happened, they came from the town where I was brought up, which was in Hertfordshire. So I said, well, who's been supporting them to get this? Anyway, I was told they had what I was told was a consultant, but actually it turned out she's a performance coach. And I said, well, could you give me an introduction? So I was introduced to her, and she was brilliant. And she ran these NLP from the ground upwards. So I had a natural connection to coaching with this particular, area of learning, which is actually pretty much misunderstood, actually, because it's all it is an awareness of what is, how do you get amazing outcomes? And they codified the practice and the behaviors, etc. So then they called it NLP. It's sort of gone slightly down a different path possibly since, but that was it. And then she had trained as a coach, and she recommended the coaching company that I ultimately did the training with for about 3 years afterwards. So that was the link.
Sounds like there's a theme always, which you touched on, in both people and the interest in what motivates them. Because the thing that stood out as well initially was bringing in that psychologist to ask what was getting these people up at 4 a.m. in the morning.
Yes, and I think I think it's connected to this thing. I don't know what I want to do. I don't know what I should do next. I don't know what's important. I don't know as a theme, Well, you can't live like that. You've got to, at some point, you've got to enshrine what you know into some form of action. And I think the real motivation for bringing, I brought that psychologist back again in the second business, and I had a business partner who was older than me, and I found it very difficult to communicate with him. I'd be saying something, and he'd be just off somewhere else, and I have no idea what's going on here. So I brought her back again, and I wanted her to help. She was a she, to help us connect. And again, that's about connecting, listening, being present, being aware in the context of what we're doing. And my business partner, is very interested in new things. So this was a new thing, and it was a very good way of getting his attention. And it helped us, work together as best we could. And another business was spun off from the one we were doing, which I wasn't involved in, but which was extremely successful. So you never know what will happen from association and connection. And put that back in a coaching conversation. You never know. In fact, you may never know. Are you meant to know? But actually, it happens too often for it to be a coincidence that people say to me, and I'm sure lots of coaches listening to this will have the same experience. People will say to you, God, you said so and so to me 15 years ago. And as a result, and I just think that's being very human and very, so in other words, you don't need to know, you don't need to control the process or whatever, but you do need to know the purpose of being together and what does good look like. And I think actually, for me, one of the most illuminating moments in my coach training and delightful moments was when I was told that you don't have to take notes. So I do sometimes, but generally I don't. And that to me is like doing the essay, you know. It's just about being present. And people say, "How do you remember that?" It's because I'm listening. I'm present. I have a very good memory, and it needs just something to jog whatever it is. And I use the context of why I'm there in front of this person, and trust that whatever I need to remember or recall will come back, and it does.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one in the coaching trainings I've been part of as a trainer. There's always that moment for someone where it's like, just try taking fewer notes at least. But there's something that I thought really interesting that I think when it's at the heart of good coaching is that trust in us to be present and to have everything we'll need for that moment, whether it's to remember something from a previous session or to come with the question that feels most appropriate. But yeah, thinking about that, where did that trust come from for you, Philip?
Well, I'm going to answer that with another story, if it's all right, because it's the same thing, I think. The NLP coach, performance coach, she has a master's in sports science and da da da. She's a psychology and what have you. So she's a sophisticated person, and she has a very good practice. Um, and um, and I was. This is when I was doing the training, and I was talking. I can't quite remember how it all came up, but anyway, I just said to her, "It's really strange. Um, I always find a parking space." And she said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, forever, people call me." Said, they actually joke about it. I mean, I used to. I mean, you wouldn't do it now, but in the early days, I would drive up to central London because I worked in central West End in the city in a car. And I always found a parking space. So if I would drive up to go to the theatre or something, and I'd find a space literally around the corner. So no, she said to me, "Why don't you just believe that you always find a parking space?" And so I said, "Oh, all right, I will." And I always find a parking space. And So the other day, Sue has a sewing machine which needed maintenance, and we drove it up to our local big town near here where parking is a pain. And she said, "Well, you won't be able to park outside." In fact, the woman in the shop said, "You won't be able to park outside because da 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 da." But there's a multi-story car park, so we went and parked in there, and walked up to the front of the shop. What was in front of the shop? A parking space. Now, I'm not trying to explain this, but I think it is the same as the trust that you will remember. There's something about alignment, that what is useful or valuable is available. And I think that coaching is an example. It's not the only one, but it's an example of creating that space between human beings in a purposeful way, and then just allowing what is to arise. And there's loads of books written about this, flow and what have you. But I do think there's something really key to trust in the space. And for that matter, with coaching, trust in the process as well, contracting the whole piece right the way through, which is about making it a safe space. And we have a responsibility to hold that. But I think there's something about that tipping point of when you think, well, I'm just going to accept that it's going to be okay. And that's not a recipe for complacency. I'm not suggesting that at all. I just think it's about knowing why you're there, which is part of contracting. And if you get multiple, if you have chemistry sessions and all that, when I first got that, and wasn't chosen, I mean, that was, as I was saying, c'est la fin du monde. That's almost the end of the world when you didn't get, because of the deep rejection and stuff. But actually, I've come to realize you get the people you need. I think you get the people you need, and you're meant to. And it means you've got to, obviously you've got to do some things yourself, but like this podcast,
Yeah, what stands out there is, with alongside trust, is purpose.
Mm.
And you talk in lots of the bits of the stories you mentioned so far. There's you've always mentioned context. It's sort of what are we here to do, and why are we doing this together? And then it almost felt like you said that what's useful or valuable then becomes available, and that purpose is clear, and kind of that space is there.
And I think there's something about, I mean, a lot often we're talking at different levels of meaning, and so integrity actually means one. Integer, it means one. So there's a wholeness that we are entering into which everything is available. That is called a quantum step. So it's not this, which is sort of, in balance, because a lot of people talk about balance. I was once corrected by a very lovely friend of mine, Carlos, and who's Chilean, and he said, it's not about balance. When you're in balance, all that happens is you'll soon be out of balance. And so this, which is a quantum place, this is from here to there, that's transformation for me in coaching. That's when the light bulb goes on, the whole thing comes together. And it's contextual again, obviously, and it's a point, but and that is so powerful. And I don't think you ever forget that. And I think that's about and that's got integrity, it's got wholeness. So I don't know, that's sort of what comes up for me with that.
Curious, Philip, and where that knowledge and understanding as you describe it now, has that been something that's come through your work as a coach, or is that maybe implicitly been present even before coaching?
No, I think we get flashes of these things, and then gradually, they turn into a belief, but I think actually what it's about is consciousness. Actually, I think it's about this level of consciousness, and as we enter into a level of consciousness, which is connectedness of everything, and you could use spiritual language for this, you could use a business language, you could use all sorts of different ways of speaking about this. And I think one of the challenges we have in our Western world is we don't actually have the words, or very effective words, to describe some of this. And I think it's about trusting that the words will emerge that are necessary to speak about this. And there's a big group in America that scientists are saying that it's 200 hertz, which is the frequency of the connection within the system of the people around. When it gets above 200, we enter into a place where it's much easier to reconcile paradox. Whereas below that, we are much in the strengths and the weaknesses, winners, losers, right. And by the way, if I'm right and you don't agree with me, that means you are, and there's that binary stuff that comes up. You may have noticed it in the little election that's going on in America at the moment, And again, I think that the coaching space is far less binary. There is binary because there's a lot of goal type focused coaching. There's nothing wrong with that. I'd suggest that it might be more in the training box than possibly. But I think it's just the stage, we're all at these levels. But ultimately, we realize that there's, everything belongs. Everything. That's what I believe anyway. That I think, and I'm more and more. It's just what it is. And again, I think it's helpful in the coaching space because it's not about agreeing. It's just about holding that space and allowing the truth, or whatever that means, to arise in the other, actually, and then have it contextualized into something that's meaningful.
Hi everybody, I'm Robbie, I'm the creator and founder of The Coach's Journey, and I've just got one quick thing before we get back to the show. As part of our commitment to keeping episodes like this free so we can support you and coaches like you, we'd like to ask something of you. Wherever you're listening to this show, please click subscribe or follow for The Coach's Journey. That's a free way of supporting the show and helping us continue to support you and other coaches. Thanks in advance for subscribing or following, and if you want to hear about other ways to support The Coach's Journey, then listen all the way to the end of this episode or visit www.thecoachesjourney.com.
It's funny that the word context comes back again. You're talking of consciousness, and the language we might use for consciousness would potentially be different in different contexts, and really interesting. And we'll join the dots at some point of where you went from coaching training to the coaching work you do today, Philip. But jumping ahead, you talk about I know that you've worked in almost every sector as a coach, and so I'd be really curious to know how the work you do, because it sounds like a lot of it is creating consciousness. What's that look like in those different contexts, or how's it presented?
That's a really good question. So everybody says it is a good question. I think what I've noticed about working in the different contexts is that they have so much in common. And the thing they have in common mainly is people, so these are people systems, not thing systems. But of course, the context defines what you value, how you measure it. So in NHS, you're going to be measuring something that's useful, or in government, politics, commercial situations. And I think that I have worked in most of them, and I don't find it difficult to adapt to different contexts. I'm curious, and at the moment, I think I work in 12 different businesses or organizations, and I'm curious about what's affecting them, because I think that is interesting. But I think the coaching profession, if I can call it that, tends to focus and prefer coaches that have worked in the same context, because there is a belief that this person will get me. Now, I quite understand that. And where that's come from is procurement, because procurement process is about matching like. So I understand that. And, there's a lot more. I'm on the panel of coaches who work in the city, mainly financial services. There's other people on coaches, they're all brilliant coaches, and they are, who've actually had full careers in financial services, whatever. And the HR people probably would select them. When I do get chosen in that context, because I don't have the background, is when there's something that's a little bit more intractable that's come up, like they thought they were going to get promoted to MD and they didn't. And they're throwing their toys out of the pram. And this is a valuable person and a member of the organization, and they want them to be at their best. So that's about awareness, and it's about awareness of it's not all about you. It's about me, us, and others, probably, in terms of what needs to be in place. But actually, there's something else as well, and I do think this is really central to coaching, is trauma. A lot of people who I work with will tell me at some point, when will I be found out? Or they'll ask me, when will I, which is sort of imposter syndrome type thing. So my only question to that, learned from Robin, by the way, you know who Robin is, and there's another coach, very, very experienced coach. And the question to that is, well, what's useful about it? Which is a really powerful question, because it completely turns upside down what the world would say, because they'd say that it's devastating, and there will be something useful. But I think that what I've learned is that everyone has experienced something that gets triggered from time to time, which means they're not at their best. And that might be expressed in a behaviour that's not helpful. And actually, in some cases, it can be a real issue, because in the conduct you can't say that, or because you're going to get sacked, because it's very sensitive. So there's this. And the world might say, well, it's about being more controlled. I would suggest it's just about being more open to other choices that you have in the moment. So that's about opening up that level of consciousness to what's happening. But actually, what's really happening is it's allowing this vulnerability to come up to the surface and allow it to be made whole. Again, so rather than it controlling me, I'm mastering it. Recognize that. And probably, in most cases, I find that this is expressed through pace. So it's actually intentionally saying, hang on, we need to slow down and get the right people in the room and have a better think about this before we react. And that could be strategic as much as it is tactical or to an individual. I work with a guy who's a very senior professional. I won't say which sector, but one of the top names which one would know. And he was divorcing. His child was not well. In other words, a whole load of storm going on, and his boss was less than present. Shall we put it like that? So he told him, he used a word which comes from the Navy, and it means why you got venereal disease, etc. So Anglo-Saxon, whatever. And as a result, he was the whole process of what happens if that sort of thing happens in a senior level in an organization. But to the credit of the organization, they said this person needs some support. But his illumination was, what might I know? What I know now, what might I do differently? Well, don't go into work, And so these are very practical things. In other words, nothing to do with corporate finance or any other. It's about human beings working together to create some outcomes. If it's to do with the technical stuff, I'd suggest it's probably mentoring rather than coaching. But what do I know?
Something that felt really interesting as you were talking, Philip. My thought process started with these people systems. That's complex. Trauma, that's complex. That's a lot for a coach to hold the space for and navigate that vulnerability. That's also complex. But it's really interesting because actually, there's a question I was going to ask as well, how do we do that as coaches? But you also answered that, because actually it's simply the slowing down, the providing the space to really think, to respond and not to react. And it's funny because amongst all that complexity, it felt like what comes out is then simple practical steps. Don't go into work, which are all the things that I can notice sometimes in coaching, when an experienced coach shares that experience of what sounds like a profound impact that they've had, thinking, oh my word, how on earth do we do that? But it boils down to some simplicity to create the space for someone to navigate complexity, which is slowing down and finding, well, what might be a better practical step.
And I actually believe that the system, if we can call it that, will find an integrity. So in other words, it's a natural place that we can find. Having said that, I work with people who are also having therapy. And with the permission of their therapist and maybe their doctor, is it the right time to have coaching? Because, and if it is, it's because now is the time to help this person begin to look forward and create some hope actually about, well, what's going on at the moment? Well, that's behind me more now. this is what will make it even better. So it is a coaching frame. And then it's about, well, if you were there in this even better place, what would you be hearing, seeing, etc.? So that's an ideation of that. And then it's about looking back. Well, how did you get there? Where did you spend your time differently? And actually, I'll just spend a bit more time with my line manager, or whatever. Oh, right. Will that be faster or slower? And therefore it is. And so I use the Carl Jung slow, fast, task, people 4-box model on which most psychometrics are all based. It's about where do you need to be in terms of pace and focus of task or people. And remember, it's people in the context of tasks getting something done. And so very often it hasn't occurred to people about getting themselves in a room with someone to have a conversation. And that really is what it's about, because everybody's so busy, fast. And that what we need in our organizations, whether it's in a group, team, individual setting, is a little bit more time together. What's that called? Coaching. And I think that's what we're modeling. We're helping people get this. Now, there are people who definitely have experienced significant trauma, and therefore they need another space as well, or alternatively, or whatever. They might need pharmacology or whatever to support them in this. So we just need to be, and that's part of the initial part of the process of, contracting and setting it up. And I think that can be missed. And then often when things go wrong, it's because the process hasn't been followed. I get people who, as a supervisor, who say to me, God, they're asking, what do I think? In the context, they're being asked for advice. What do I do? Da, da, da. So the first place I would go is say, well, what did you agree at the beginning? How you deal if there was a question that they wanted to ask you something. What did you agree? So that's a good practice. That's about slowing down and thinking about the things that might get in the way along. So I'm sorry, I think coaching is the most natural thing in the world. I really think it's the most natural thing in the world. And we can make it as complicated as we like, and we do, human beings generally do, but actually it is about that. And is it skillful? Yes, of course it is. Does it require experience? Yes, of course it does. And we need to know whether, this is where the trust comes in, that we get the work we need to learn. I learn every single time I ever have a coaching conversation, that's what makes it interesting, So I think there's something about trust that you get the work you need in order to grow as a coach, as much as for this person to grow, because it is a two-way street.
Yeah, and on that, you sort of touched on it as well, that trust doesn't mean that you don't do nothing to get the work you need. How do you hold both of those things? Because that, for me, sounds like lots of people might talk to you about coaching, but the people that are right for you for coaching are the ones that will say yes and the others will say no. And what does it mean for you?
Well, that's a bigger question, isn't it? I think because it's a business. Can we go there? It's with the business. So the one thing that I think that we have to remember is that if we decide to be a coach, is that we're running a business. It is a business, and the only purpose of a business. No, sorry, I'll rephrase that. One of the primary aims or purposes of a business is to grow clients. Literally to generate clients. It is less. It's less about being the best technical coach I can possibly be, or something. It might be, but fundamental. So, in other words, who? So, for me, a progression in from this is going well, and this is even better. This is all about who. So, coaching is about who, and then there's context, obviously. But I think the first thing is how are you going to get to who, and what is it that you want to communicate to who about what you do? Well, probably the best way of getting another who, which is a possible coaching client, is somebody who's working with you and values what you do, And at the end of it, you were able to say, look, you know what I do and how I experience it. Do you know anyone else who you think would value from what I do? And if they're in a sort of professional level, or wherever you're choosing to focus, young emerging talent or whatever, or neurodiversity or whatever it is, once you sort of identify that area, that focus, asking people who are in that is the most logical thing to do. I suggest. I don't think that's enough, but it's that's the most powerful one, I think. The other one is it seems to me that most people who are coaches don't just coach. I mean, honestly, because it's too pure. Unless you're an internal coach or something and you're employed directly within Google or somebody to do that, in which case you're salaried, so you don't have to pay. I would suggest to you that most people are offering a variety of things, and it might be one-to-one coaching, group coaching, team coaching, might be facilitation, it might be consulting around organizational development if that happens to be your professional expertise or whatever. So in other words, it's about, what I do. Oh, yeah, you can come and help us talk about this. So that's what you really want. You want to get some kind of inquiry. The other, so that would be one's own portfolio of clients. The other thing, I mean, I've done this and do it, is you ask another coach, well, where do you get your work? And they'll say, well, I'm never quite believe what everybody says, by the way, because it's never quite. But anyway, that's another story. But I got recommended to a couple of organizations that specialize in providing organizational leadership development, which would include coaching like that. And if you go through a process of, have you got your qualifications, and then they'll become an associate. They get to know you, and then they get work, and then we'll put 2 or 3 coaches forward for an assignment, and so would be good there. And they're doing some matching, so that would be one. And I would say a couple of those would be valuable. The only problem is that it's a bit like acting. There are far more actors than there are workers. Was it 10% of actors are in work? I don't know what the figure is for coaching. So I just think this is the reality. So that's why you need to have an offering that's going to be broad enough to give you whatever you need to get out of it. So I think exploring those things. So asking your existing clients, who do you know? What I do. Could you recommend anybody? And then also so many coaches how do you get your coaching? Any recommendations of where I might get that, whereby I don't need to sell it? Somebody else has done the selling. I have to accept a lower fee, but at least you've got some flow of work.
Mm.
And what that does, it gives you more experience, and it gives you more stories to tell, more logos to put on your website. If you ask permission. So
Important to ask permission.
Yes.
There's lots of really good wisdom in there, Philip. Interesting, almost. I'm tempted to go back 14 years and almost ask, and how did that emerge? Because there's the who, but there's also, as you say, these different strands. And I know that you do consulting and facilitation. You had your business before you added coaching to it, and it was interesting that you said I added coaching. It wasn't I then became a coach as such. So yeah, how did that process unfold of adding coaching and then identifying that who and finding these different sectors?
Well, actually, it happened before that, because the psychologist that I mentioned earlier, this is in 2000, and we'd sold the other business, and I was sort of starting out bravely on my own with this marketing consultancy thing. And I'd had some other businesses. Was doing something else as well. But I said, what do I need to do? And she said, you need to go and get trained in facilitation. So I went on, and I had several things with a company that she recommended. I don't know that she knew them very well, actually, and it turned out to be such a good choice, because very, very practical facilitation skills. much of which comes into coaching actually, but it was about holding a room, And I had a marketing, affinity marketing business at one point. We used to get brands together in the room who wanted to reach the other person's customer base and vice versa. So it was about having a facilitated conversation about what's going well, what would make it even better for both, and then putting it back together. So I was well equipped to have that. So, and what I think I've noticed about coaching is it's extraordinary how equipped you find yourself to deal with what presents itself if you trust that what's coming up is what's needed, shall we say. But I think what actually happened with the coaching, I finished the first two major chunks where I'd done all the learning. And I love coaching because it's such an extraordinary broad frame to bring in all sorts of knowledge. So I learned massively. I do think I don't know if it's in this country alone, but we do seem to have a belief that I leave education and that's it. And actually, it's complete cobblers that, because you never stop learning. The only time you stop learning is when they put you in a box, because we are actually learning, from the brain's point of view, but also ultimately from an interest point of view. So I completed that training just before the supervision training that I did, which took longer. But and as part of the passing out, you had to do observed coaching sessions to get the tick boxes, etc., etc. And the program I did included ILM level 7 and also ICF ACC to PCC actually. So I only needed to do the hours because of the amount that I had learned, if you like, within that, which was very interesting. Anyway, one of the guys who I had as my guinea pig for one of the psychometric tools that we had to use and coaching as part of the overall process and assessment was in a bit of a stuck state. He was at a company, he's a professional, and he put forward a proposal to open an overseas office and and put the whole business case, and they wouldn't do it. So he was a bit frustrated around that. And he's, to some extent, Tigger, quite a quiet Tigger. But so this was a very suppressed sort of state that he found himself in. And I said to him, so what do you, sort of just career coaching, really? I said, well, if this is Harry Potter's magic wand, what would be a dream job? And he said, oh, I'd like to work there. And I said, do you know anybody there? Now, bearing in mind, my background is in business development, so it's about growing business. So I brought that into that coaching conversation. So you could say that was a bit more mentoring. Anyway, I said, do you know anybody who works there? And he said no. I said, are you sure? He said, oh, actually, I did meet somebody at a networking thing. I said, could you go and have a cup of coffee with him? Anyway, he joined. And this is immediately after I just finished the coach training. And he got a job there as a deputy MD within this area of this company. This is in construction consultancy. And he said, oh, come and meet my boss. So, within 2 weeks, I was coaching 11 directors, 2 deputy MDs, and the MD around basically strategic facilitation for, well, in 3 years' time, this is our ambitions, how we're going to get there. And what it required were technical people working on the business, so on growing the business. So that was the context. And they didn't know that I had only read the chapter ahead. So I offer that to you because you just, and I worked there for 8 years. I worked there for 8 years and I worked with 70 people in that organization. And they grew and they continue to grow. I mean, unbelievable. They're one of the largest in the world now. So what is that? Luck. I would suggest and I don't know that the world might call it luck, but it is. But of course, I learned so much about the context and, who, and then I got referred and this and that. So I just think this is a very long way of saying, I just think that just do it. If you get this opportunity and you're not being paid, because I wasn't paid for that, obviously, that thing. You never know. As long as you sort of, as long as it's got some sense in terms of context, you never know where one piece can move and become a relationship with an organization that's got a much bigger need. I think in these times, I would suggest to you that very few people are going to take a risk on someone they don't know. So this was effectively a referral. That makes sense. And I ended up doing teamwork and, whatever. And the only other thing I would say, and funny enough, the lady who did the NLP training, who I kept in touch with, she has a belief that things go in 8-year cycles. I've got no science to prove that, but in other words, nothing. It's the Belbin curve. Nothing lasts forever. It will. So we need to keep topping it up with being curious about people. So I'm purely talking about the bit growing a business here, really, which is about the who bit of getting referrals to people who get you and what you do. I don't know if does that make sense.
Absolutely, yeah. I think it's really in both a growing a business context and probably starting out as a coach context. There is that sort of jumping into the deep end aspect. So yes, there's luck, but there's another world where you went, probably not quite qualified to do this yet. And then that question isn't there and obviously only we know this ourselves, but what do I need to feel qualified for it? Or actually, is this the process by which I can feel more qualified? It's the, confidence is often a result and not a requirement frame.
And I would suggest that one of the things for coaches is to have supervision. I don't know if all do, but because that's the sort of place you could bring that question: am I ready to do this yet or not? And it's objective. I would suggest that if it's presenting itself, the world is probably saying to you, "Go on," probably.
Yeah, very true. And that's a very good point as well, in that supervision can help us make those decisions, but also can provide some of that support that means that, yes, we might be taking on this new work, but we never have to take it on alone.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Because I think that it is obviously it's to do with personality, whether we prefer to be autonomous or we prefer to be more collaborative or whatever. I do think that it's about, there's something about doing some good thinking about. So the question, you haven't asked it yet, but if I can, but so in the coach training, what's your niche? What's your niche? Well, niche in French means dog kennel. So I don't know if there's anything relevant about that, but I didn't know my niche. I called my business a corporate name. Why have you called it that? They said. And last year, I actually rebranded as my name, which is what they had suggested 14 years earlier. But, sometimes it takes time to get. But what I realized was that really people buy me. And that's not because I'm anything special or whatever, but, that you're telling people that's what you're getting. And if that's what you want, well, it's probably make it easy for them to see it rather than hiding behind some title or whatever.
What was the thing that changed that meant you chose to rebrand, Philip?
Well, I think I was on one of those GoDaddy or whatever it's called sites, and I was, through curiosity, I put in philipcrocker.com and it was available, so I bought it, and I'd had it in the back of my mind. But I think that it was really, I think I just wanted to make it easier, actually, for people to know, who. Am I allowed to go to what my son-in-law gave me the advice last year? So last year I was rebranding to Philip Crocker, and my son-in-law is in digital marketing, and a very skilled guy, very bright bloke. And I said, what do I have to do? He said, you need to update the website. And I said, oh, I can do that. And then he said, you need to write a book. And I thought, oh God, does the world need another book? And then he said, and you need to start a podcast. And I thought, what? I barely heard of podcasts, And then about a month or so later, I was on a coachy call, and this one of the coaches on it, mentioned his podcast, and I thought, so I connected with him, and I said, well, could I talk to you about that? And he was very generous, and he told me about how he'd done it. And I don't think he'll mind me saying this. When the pandemic hit, he was doing a lot of work with the major consulting houses. He come from a particular background. He was really well equipped and positioned for it. And he lost 80% of his work because everything stopped with that particular one. So somebody had suggested a podcast, and he did it. And he just at the end of the podcast, he just asked them if it's a leadership podcast, and it's very successful. And he just asked them, "Do you know anybody else who you think would make a good conversation on the podcast?" And he asked for two, and he's always had two. And there's always senior people. These are the sort of people he works with. And he said he's never looked back. So I share that, but he's never done any marketing ever since that. So in other words, this has been a means of. And if you look at podcasts, it's still it is actually still relatively new. There's a few outliers that are very, very popular, but most of them are actually sort of more grounded. Anyway, I felt this was a kick up the backside, so I thought I better actually do this. So I started it, and I thought, what do I call it? What do I call it? Can I go here? Is it right to share this now? What I've called this podcast. I like to ask permission, and it's a good coaching thing there. So I've called it alongside-er, which, as in alongside someone, which is the position of the coach. And I believe this is the position of the line manager. This is the position of parent, shaman, priest, rabbi. It's community place alongside. Sometimes we just need a place where we can have a conversation, which is, this is going well, but what would make it even better is this. And I don't even know what will. So this is that sort of coaching space. And I've called it Finding Your Place and Taking Your Place. And I launched it at the beginning of this year, and I've nearly done 40 episodes with very different people who are just sharing their stories around. Some are coaches, others not, and in lots of different sectors. And it's been absolutely illuminating, because ultimately where we're getting to is, what do you value in an alongside-er for you, and vice versa? What do you think others value in you as alongside? So that's this place of awareness about what's useful. I'm going to use an AI tool to interrogate the conversations, to get some themes, to get a sort of model. But I sort of really want to position it as a whole position. It's not just coach. It's actually this whatever's relevant to contextually as the most natural thing. And it's teaching me a lot, one of which is make sure you put the recording button on when you start the recording. I've only done that on one so far, which was the person in question has very, very generously agreed to re-record it. But it's really interesting just seeing how this comes up. And I'm going to collaborate with another colleague who is a consultant, creative consultant. He's going to do some illustrations for a book, which I'm going to call Alongside-er, which is really around a frame of what's going well, what would make it even better, and what's the context, me, us, and others. And it's really a little frame to take people through, okay, I get a sense of that would be good. Yeah, well, how are we going to get there? So it is actually enshrining in some action, which is a coaching frame, I think, because I think these are the things that we can. And I guess one of the guys who's on the podcast, who's been in training, development, coaching, 360 stuff for a long time. He's one of life's enthusiasts, and he's doing a coaching thing at the moment with getting coaches together. But his thing, which I must say I've borrowed, is it's about helping to create better bosses. And I think in the workplace, if people could say more often, that boss I had was transformational. They said, they really encouraged me, or they really kicked me up the backside, or whatever it was that enables. In other words, a whole blend of things. It's not just coach. And I just think that it's really important work. But I do think there is a need to identify coach as a place, because it's got disciplines, ethics, which might not necessarily be relevant in other contexts, or apparent, shall I say.
Yeah.
So I think there's something. So that's finding a place, taking your place. I think that's what I did as a coach. What's your place as a coach? How are you going to take it? We've got to do it. You just got to do it, and then see what you notice, what you learn. It's a similar thing, I think.
And funny, as soon as you said that's what you did as a coach, I'm instantly reminded of that client that you had the recording of, and then you took your place in that organization, coaching them for 8 years. Which, So it's a lens that fits well. But we'll link to the Alongsider as well in the show notes. It's a really good podcast. Would recommend it once people have listened to this one. But
much shorter. No, sorry.
Yeah. You mentioned a book will come, but what have you learned in terms of what makes an Alongsider?
Well, you said it. Listening, obviously, but I think it's beyond listening. I think it's being really present in spirit, soul, and body. I'm going to use that as a whole way, and not limiting this. I think that we are terrified, or we hear apparently we're terrified of AI and this and that, and I don't know, we're terrified of this and that. Will there ever be a time of peace? No. The world is what it is. But what we can do is create peace around us, I think. And if everybody did that, then the world would change. And I think there's something about finding a place and taking a place, which is a really important sort of part of all of this. I've forgotten your question.
It was really what you've learned about an Alongsider and that process.
Yeah, I think that it's the importance of finding and taking your place. I mean, Carl Jung said we come out of the one and we live our lives a bright spark, and then we go back into the one. This is his words, not mine. And this is life. And it said that somebody said, life comes at you. We think we push life that way. No, it doesn't actually. Life is there. Life is here. And I think that maybe this time, this season, is a time to take stock about what matters, and that actually it's less about how many likes I got on my social media and how many this and that. The other things we count. I suspect that if we could have really good coaching across our organizations, in our workplaces, in our schools, in our communities, that maybe we would find it more insightful what counts. What finding your place and taking your place, and that actually will impact the whole of the community. What makes you happy? Well, it's said about what happens makes you happy. Joy is accepting the fact that there's pain, and there is pain. It's a choice to suffer. And the suffering is actually how we choose to respond to what is. And I think that's another very important coaching space. This person is really annoying, me hugely. Oh, really? Okay. And that's what I've noticed about this rising in consciousness, is that I'm aware that I'm getting annoyed, and I'm aware that I'm not doing anything about it. I choose not to respond. And I think that would be a place, and I'm sure I think this is recapturing a discipline. Good manners is about, not triggering the other person. But of course it can be manipulated into some social blah, blah, whatever. I think, well, we're becoming more aware of what matters, and some of that might be recapturing some of these disciplines. So the coaching space has its innate discipline of awareness, and contextually it's been, set out to offer. And I find increasingly a lot of this is people falling in love with themselves more. In other words, not suffering when will I be found out? Oh, I hate that in me. I don't like this. I don't like that, and everything else. And actually saying, well, look, it is what it is. What would make it even better? Well, what would make it even better if I could do that presentation with more ease? How would that be? Well, what about we prepare a bit rather than do it on the last? I mean, these aren't. I just think these are eminently practical things, actually connected to the bigger things. And again, I think once we slow down, we contextualize it. Well, who matters? It begins to. And I don't think that it takes hours and hours. Therapy might need to take a long time to really deal with these things. Sometimes these are people just say, "Oh, that's what it is. That's what's triggering me. What would you like to do with it? Well, I'd like to let go. Well, who's in control of that? And I think there's a lot going on here, which is possibly quite complex, but ultimately it's very simple, I think, and minimal.
Which comes back to, I suppose they're not necessarily steps, but the finding your place, taking your place. There's an element of support might be needed for those, but it has to also the willingness to go, I want to find my place, and then the step, I need to take it. And that, as you were talking about, it's about love. Sometimes it's about loving ourselves more. That really stood out for that idea of taking our place. And so, what's getting in the way of you taking your place?
Mm. Mm. And I think there's been some really good writing as well. I mean, there's a few very good coaching books. Claire Pedrick is somebody who I rate very highly. And she's written her book, which is Simplifying Coaching. And she's just written this year, The Human Behind the Coach, which has been awarded Business Book of the Year in its category. And I'm not surprised. So that's the human behind the coach, So this thing about, and that's coming up in all sorts of places, I think, as a theme, against AI, against robotics, so that's about how do we connect, and another one that came to mind as you were speaking was David Rock, Dr. David Rock, who is a psychologist and coach, works systemically. He wrote a book. He is very interested in neuroscience. He introduced neuroscience into coaching and stuff. He works mainly in America now. And but his book, The Quiet Leadership, which is, I think it's about 10 different, it's a bit like the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, but it's his version of it, if you like. And one of the ones he has is this, it seems the brain has got 5 preferences. He calls it SCARF, SCARF, and that is status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. It seems that 2 of those will resonate with us and be important to us. And it's not emotional, it's the way the brain happens to be set in at the time, if you like. And I think that's really important. And the fairness one's really interesting because that apparently if you present something that's unfair to the brain, it will reject it. So this is a really useful addition to the coaching space, I think. A lot of psychologists will embrace it. Some, anything new, it might take longer for some. I really think that one of the challenges that we have in our society in the West is our education. It is so siloed, and that thinking goes into our lives afterwards. Particularly, it's really reinforced And our organisations aren't siloed. Well, they are siloed. There's areas of complexity and expertise and everything else, but they work when they work together and they're aware of the interdependence of it. And this stuff, Robin Yerston, who we worked with you a little bit at University Phi, he's developed this model of consciousness. I think it's a really valuable piece that would be added to coach training, actually, as much as it would do in just general education to help people be aware. It will change things hugely, I think. So there's all of this emerging in this space. But of course, we often don't know what we don't know. And again, that's why I think the coaching space is valuable for people to discover what we don't know. And maybe it's in our hands. Where are the keys? Oh, they're in my hand. Have we done that? You probably haven't. You're far too young, but it does happen. May I ask you a question?
By all means, Philip.
What have you noticed that's emerging in these conversations that you're having like this, and maybe obviously your colleagues are doing the same? What do you know? Are there any themes emerging?
Yeah, really, really good question. I think the complexity and simplicity is definitely, from the conversations I've had, stands out in particularly conversations including coaching in spaces where coaching is probably otherwise not accessed, or spaces where there's been significant trauma or challenge. That there's real complexity, and it's not to say that coaching is the right thing in all those cases, but there's the simplicity of, and it's one person being with another person. I'm not going to get it quite right, but coincidentally, you quoting Jung, another interview I did with Mark Bixley, he referenced Jung as well, and that you can know all the models, know all the theories, but ultimately it's one human soul with another human soul.
Which is an integrity.
Yeah. And I think both that returning to presence, both in coaching, but also the idea of really what does a prosperous or sustainable business look like? It's one that's interdependent, which is people knowing people. One of the things that I noticed from this conversation actually is that sense of, it sounds like there's a community that you are part of and have created, of people who share similar interests or are interested in people and people development. How can we make these things even better? You've probably both contributed to and created, but been part of. And I think it's those two things stand out a lot in the conversations and the episodes I've listened to. So while there are some very practical things, you could probably boil them down to, well, if you talk to enough people about coaching and also be human in that coaching, you probably can't help but eventually create a really prosperous, sustainable business that involves coaching in it. And to your point, it might not just be coaching, but I think there's an element of trust is the other one, of following intuition. Because I think the thing that stood out from all of the episodes I listened to, haven't listened to all of them. Don't know if that's a good admission to make on the podcast, but
I think it's the reality.
Yeah. Yeah. But every single person that's created a coaching business or is a coach or works in some way as a coach has done something differently, and it's about them being them in how they've done it.
And I think that's really lovely. I mean, the other thought that comes to mind, you said, have you talked to enough people? Claire Pedrick would say, and she said, try and do, assuming you're doing this as a full-time thing, 3 days delivery, and the other 2 days are business development. So it is effort, and by the way, you don't get paid for it, So I think for that, it needs some thought, and it just needs, and maybe you need a coach. or a mentor, or I mean, I rarely would end a program of coaching without suggesting or asking whether this had been useful and what's been useful. And they say, well, it's just useful to have a space to have a conversation about things as they come up. And I say, all right, how would it be if you could continue that? And then we talk about the difference between mentoring and coaching. And I would often encourage people to think about the criteria of, if you had a dream coach, this is Harry Potter's magic wand, who would it be that fits with those criteria? And then go and ask them. And then just say, do you know anybody who would be a good mentor for me? And they might say they would do it, which is an open question. But that's about keeping that space open that you can go and access. And it might be inside the organization, it might be outside. But the same thing applies to our coaching businesses, because the referrals are possibly going to come from that place who are going to take somebody's seat. And obviously, it's an economic cycle. I mean, it goes up and down. At the moment, it's a nice to have for a lot of people. It's a reality. Some organisations are doing very well at the moment, and they are, and they've got more money. We'll go there. I think, but no, that's interesting. And the whole person, all this. Coach the whole person, etc. I mean, the books are around there. It's real, and it's a real place, and it takes time to find one's place and take it, I think.
What stood out there? Well, one of the many things that stood out, Philip, was reminding me of the story you were talking about at the very beginning. I think I noted it down something, but with that first cleaning business, the certainty of income. And now it's been over 20 years with your consultancies to start with. I think you sort of touched on it. There's some sort of mindset shift that has to be made, because you said that networking is really important, but you aren't being paid for it. So yeah, what have you noticed in terms of the thinking about perhaps how you work, or around kind of how we are paid for work, or for the work is valued? How has that shifted or changed for you, if at all?
The thing is, about when I got that first bit of work, nobody was more surprised than me, and I had no idea it was happening at the time. In the sense that this was such an extraordinary opportunity, I really didn't know where it would end up. I'd obviously done business development before, so alongside doing the cleaning, I'd also be checking in. Was it okay? Did we get away with enough? No, sorry. Did we? But that's the truth, actually, because it's about perception and stuff. But where's the next one coming from? So you're sort of doing those two things. So I've always had that mind. But I think that, I mean, some people I've coached for many years, I don't mean continuously, but I mean, they've come back and stuff, because they feel that I understand the context and I understand where they're coming from. So that's useful. Other people I coach at McKinsey at the moment, and I'll coach someone for an hour. I'll never see them again. But it's amazing what you can get done in an hour. It took me a long time to get onto the McKinsey panel, all sorts of hoops to go through. And I think when you become an associate, I got onto one of the main platforms that there are, people will know about now. And it was because the company that I was doing some work with as an independent decided to go with this corporate. So they introduced me. So I became part of it. But I did a right cock up. Well, one thing I did was I did for them. It was awful. It wasn't coaching. It was training, really, and that's not me, because it's far too disciplined. Sort of, but it was about fit. They wanted somebody else. But I found my place, and I have actually got there. But so what I'm saying is, I think sometimes you've got to just try it and see. even though you might think that that's not right. And I know a lot of coaches don't find that it's a challenge when the rates go down, because there's a lot of these platforms around which are inevitably making the rates. The way I've looked at that is, I think it would be really useful to have a breadth of experience for now what's going on in the corporates, even though the rate's less. And it's been really good coaching. Really enjoyed it. Some of it's quite senior. You never know what's going to happen. So I would just don't be too judgmental about the thing that's coming up, even though it might be paid less. Because to me, the thing that's important is the cleaning thing which is to have the work that's going to come in more regularly. And we do have to work at that. So the 2 days, 3 days thing, I do think is a reality, actually. And until you find your niche, and then gradually it will begin to flow. I mean, it's a big world out there. There's lots of places that don't use coaches and stuff, and they probably could. And so we're almost. I mean, I was at a funeral the other day for a dear aunt of mine who was a concert pianist, amongst other things, and died at 91 or so good year. And some of the rallies that were there was in their 60s and 70s, and they said, "Oh, what do you do?" So I told them, and they said, and they'd never heard of it. I mean, there's a lot of people who've never heard of coaching, especially older ones. Why would you want that? And I think the reason is because I would include myself in that age group, in the third stage of life, is that we've come from a command and control environment where you just did what you were told, basically. And that now, gradually and now completely, that does not work unless there's a fire. If there's a fire, there's the door, get out. That's probably quite helpful as a command. But in terms of getting things done, the only thing we have is influence to encourage people to be aware, to make better decisions for themselves. So it's that. I think there's a huge shift going on there, and if you throw in hybrid working and all the other things that have been lobbed at people recently, it's quite a challenge to make sense of that, I think, and particularly as leaders, because you're still going to get stuff done, and the dial, it needs to be at 6 and it's only at 3. What are we going to do to get it up to 6? That's a reality.
Yeah, and
the only way through that, I think, is connection, conductivity, and influence with people. So you have to connect, you have to slow down, you have to onboard them properly, you have to prepare them, they have to be aware. So you've got to put that in as well. And that's the same thing for your coaching business. You've got to have that time of connecting. It's no different, really, just a different context.
I've heard you speak about conductivity before, Philip, for people that may be less familiar with that concepts. Could you say a bit more? What is conductivity?
So if we think of, I think everybody will be familiar with the slow, fast, task people 4-box model. That's Carl Jung's model of personality. How do I experience someone? Fast and task. So this is colors: red, yellow, blue, green, etc. Incense most of these psychometrics are based on this model. Disc, extended disc. So I often use this in coaching, to ask people, how would they describe the organization they're in? How would they describe themselves? How would they describe their boss, etc.? So 4 boxes, bottom right-hand box. We now know we don't live in a command and control culture in our organizations, because it just doesn't work broadly, except when Amazon tells everybody to go back to work and their leadership. That's another. So that would be red, that would be top right, and that's dominance. The bottom right-hand box is nearer people and faster, and it's influence. So you don't influence a task, you influence people in the context of getting something done. Top left-hand box is compliance. Those aspects of any task, if you go too fast, you probably make a mistake. Forensic analysis, coding, etc. Open heart surgery. If you go too fast, it might make a mistake. If you go too slowly, the patient might die on the operating table. So it's about the right pace for the context. So influence, if that's all we've got. So the question I often say is, do you use an iPhone or an Android? Yeah.
iPhone, yeah.
So if I said to you on Monday you're going to swap for a Galaxy, Samsung Galaxy, what would you say?
No, thank you.
Thank you. And that's a very polite response. I suggest that a lot of people will say something else as well. So all we can do is influence. So a model would be, if you think of a simple graph like this, the horizontal is time, and this is measuring something that's sustained high over time. This is actually an NLP model, actually, that creates an outcome of increasing influence. So, and it's probably experienced as, all right, well, seeing as it's you, I'll give it a try. Okay. Seeing as it's you so what is it you've got? So what's this measuring? And just for speed, I'll just say, I mean, could you suggest something that might be measuring on this vertical here to create an outcome of increasing influence?
I'm on the spot now, Philip. So we've got time on the bottom, increasing influence.
So you've been prepared to give my Samsung Android a go for a week. What is it that you've actually? What is it that's motivated you to do it? Give it a go for a week.
Trust.
Thank you. So a lot of people say that. So this is trust. This is, some people, it's knowing the right things to do. I think this is one of the most complex things in the universe. I use it beyond the NLP a bit because they would say this is rapport. So this is the quality of connection between people in the people system that creates an outcome of increasing influence. So that is culture, actually. It's and radical candor. All of these things are about, can I be ready? If you've got, this is low and you are radically candid, it's toxic. If this is high, even though it may sound harsh or whatever, it can be received in a way, okay, I'll accept it, okay, or whatever. I think a better way of looking at it is if you take one of these. This is a mobile phone. This is made up of a load of microprocessors, total extent of my knowledge. Some of these microprocessors are connected with gold. Why? And they are. Why gold? Because when the energy flows in the system with the least resistance, because gold resists the energy flow the best, I can make a phone call. So conductivity might be a better description of this than just the rapport, because that's one level of it. It's actually much more three-dimensional, actually. It's the bandwidth through which the energy can flow. So the only strategic thing for a leader, I'd suggest to you, is to identify who matters in this people set, and some of it will be outside, and intentionally build connection and conductivity with them so that they will be listening to you. They might be, you could call this manipulation, but I'd suggest to you that in the coaching context, it is manipulation, but it's taking someone to a place, manipulation, to a place they want to go to, because they know, they are aware, and you're not taking them, you're enabling them to take themselves there. And that's really what this conductivity, and I think that's in a really effective coaching space. That's what's going on. And the interesting thing is, this emerged from work with Robin and Carlos, who's another colleague of ours. Human conductivity, we've called it. But I think it's a really interesting. So it's not a soft thing. But it's based on, we realize, quantum mechanics, which is that everything is connected with energy. And it's allowing that energy, the energy is the energy is the energy. It's not good or bad. It's not binary. It's just what it is, and allowing it to flow. And I think that's this trusting. So this is this thing, go back to the, maybe we just try that. So limiting beliefs dissolve. So there's a lot going on here, and I mean, I learned the use of that model within NLP within my coaching practice, but I realized that there's something more to it, and I think conductivity is for our times in a digital age, which is, and remembering digital means on or off. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about this and that, creating an outcome of possibilities, probably.
Mm.
And that's this awareness thing, I think, that, and how can we reconcile paradoxes in leadership, or, for myself or whatever. Well, maybe I can have a conversation with someone else and see what emerges.
Yeah, and I think it goes round both ways in the power of creating conductivity through coaching and in spaces and in people's systems and enabling energy flow. But also, I think we started that kind of this thread talking about that time to create connection, to at least conductivity. There's a little bit of the complexity in that in creating connections, you don't know how the energy will flow, but you're almost trusting that the flow will create the outcome you want, which is through influence, which might be, right, this person goes, oh, actually, yeah, maybe I need some more of this thing. Philip's a great person to talk to about this. I'll talk to Philip.
Yes, and which is attraction, which is in fact the law of attraction, which is what you sort of you just described, I think. I think the interesting thing is that we can't force people to do things. The only way we can do it is through the quality of connection we've got with people, and that's true of our organizations, our communities, and our society. And we live in a time when there's a lot of below the line consciousness, which is I'm right, which you said earlier on, which means if I'm right, that means you are wrong. These people are lighting fires around the country, apparently stirred up by social media. They are terrorists, or they are right wing, whatever. Well, maybe. And so, and to me, it's about having a more adult, more rich conversation. Well, and how can we? Because we tend to go to control, put laws in place or whatever. Well, laws are fine if anybody obeys them or anybody looks after them. And that I'd suggest to you, so much of what we see at the moment is never going to bring us the outcome we want. What we want is more from less, which is more like simplicity, and minimal. And that is, if we built this, so there are people, she's on my podcast actually, Deborah Green, for example, she is, her thing, I've got a book over there, she curates community conversations. And she's a great facilitator, coach, effectively. She's Deputy Lieutenant of Manchester. She, with others, helped change the name from Gunchester to Manchester. And that was redeeming Manchester as the identity of who they are. So if you put that into the coaching context, and in that one, it's more complex because you've got lots of different, you get the ambulance, the police, the schools, all the community participants together as a group to form a team, I think. But if you think of that in terms of the coaching space and a leader, it's about them and those they seek to influence. And it might be that way. It might be peers, it might be line reports, or it might be outside. And the only way to do that is to create this conductivity, which requires time, investment. Now put that back into the coaching conversation. It's the same thing, actually. And I think that's why we need 2 days to go and have those conversations, or participate on podcasts or whatever, so people get a sense of who people are. And in that respect, I don't think coaching is any different. As it happens, though, I do think it's core to what we do, is this conductivity. I think that's really what we're doing. But actually, that's what our leaders are doing, our supervisors, our clinicians, etc.
But I'm aware that I could keep going for another 2 hours, which we don't have, because that would make it far too long a podcast, but we still have a bit of time. I'd be really curious to know, what's on your horizon now. You've been coaching, consulting, facilitating 20 plus years. What's next? The question that you brought at the very beginning. What's next?
Well, I think the podcast is going to be very interesting. And I have a lovely alongside-er who's been helping me with the podcast, and he said, "Well, just see what happens." And when I started it, people say, "So what's the audience? How many people?" And people still say to me, "Well, how many people are on the podcast?" And I know other podcasts, and I had one today where they said they're now in the top 5% of da 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 da. And I appreciate that's important because it's a measure of is it worthwhile being here. But in a way, I'm so intrigued by people who say to me, who I sort of bump into, and they say, "God, I've just listened to your podcast of so and so," and it's not because they've listened to them all; they just happen to, listen to. And that's really interesting, and I'm intrigued by that person because that's changed that person or influenced them, and as a result, I can see they might do something as a result. So I think that's very interesting. I hesitate to say book because, as I say, I think there's so many books, but I think I would like to write a book, or in book form, or in some form of modules or whatever, which is really my strategic facilitation model, which is really it's just a process and I've pinched it from people. I've given them, I make sure I acknowledge them because I think you do, and we all pick up coaching tips and stuff from, it is a sort of an eclectic thing, and that's how it should be because that's called learning, because if I didn't know it now, I know it, and that's called learning. I've got that. I want to use the alongside of stories, themes that have emerged alongside. So it will be a method, but it will also hopefully be brought to life in a coaching frame because that's what it's for. But it will be called alongside of finding your place, taking your place. And again, it goes back to the nuns. They wrote me off. Well, I felt they wrote me off. And I know that's the worst place in the world to be written off. I think there's so many people in our society today who feel written off. So if I could do a tiny bit to helping people, whether it's, sort of regain their mojo, self-belief, etc., and take up whatever's happening. And the other thing is that I do believe that life is not about, one thing. It's about a whole load of things, obviously family and community and stuff. But to live a whole life. So if it could be something like that. So I would love it that alongside it becomes a way of helping people be alongside. And I didn't say the C word, C being coach, because it's becoming more and more academic. It's and which is fine up to a point, but I think it needs to be released. It needs to be set free from rigor and all. It needs to be ethical. It needs all of those things. But this is only my thing, and I know there's other people who maybe completely disagree, and that's absolutely fine. But I think there is something about helping us to be more inclusive, right the way across the board, from our education to our communities to our organizations. There's a big obsession around diversity. Well, if you want diversity, just look out the window and look at nature. It's there. It's a given. We are diverse. It is that. And that's fine. Simon Fanshawe was on my podcast the week before last. He was one of the founders of Stonewall. And he, so I really recommend it, actually, if it's okay to give a plug for it. But he's great fun. He's a stand-up comedian. He's rector of Edinburgh University and a whole load of other things. But he has a consultancy around DE and inclusion. And he says that when he talks to senior people, what he's saying is look what you're missing when you don't include, in terms of innovation, quality of conversation, breadth, perspective, etc. Whereas a lot of our decision making is below the line, which is, we're right, you're wrong, winners, losers, etc. And what we're trying to do is just get that, and we all dip below the line, but the gift of awareness is to get above it. So I think that's sort of where I'd like to take this, if I can, is just to help that. And I know Universify, what drives that is about inclusion in the most practical, but it's so much more than that, because there's so much more that's being gained by all the participants to the process. And I think that the sort of top-down attitude, of doing something to, isn't going to work. What needs to happen is more community, more collaboration, more ability to work together in order to. And if you look at things like the NHS, I'd suggest you that's the ingredient. It needs more of that, and it's there, because I know it's there. And talk to anybody and it's not. The culture there is very difficult as a place because there's so much fear. In our politics, it's so binary, and I just think if we could actually create more inclusivity, and it's there. It just needs to be, it needs to be given the opportunity to bring it out, which I think is an act of leadership. And it needs to start here. We can't, because we tend to start, about over there, fix it over there sort of stuff. And what about we start here? Me, myself, and then how we connect. So I think that's what I would like to see. I'm 66 now, and I have no intention of retiring. Mrs. Crocker has told me that. But what would I do? So I'm really looking forward to the time, and I'm looking forward to collaborating. I've met some fantastic people through coaching, in every sense, client-wise, colleagues. And it never ceases to amaze me how, varied the motivation is for coming into this. But the common ground is the heart, I think, what people care about. So the alongside, I just think is something that would be something which I hope. So I've got 40 episodes to conclude by the end of next month, and then I'll do the analysis, and then we'll start working on the other things next year. And hopefully we'll have moved by then. So.
Yeah. Wow. And I think there's something really fascinating in like this separation from the concept of coach. And almost the simplicity that alongside it brings it. Talking of, learning is borrowing. I mean, I always use often a therapist is behind, a mentor's in front, and a coach is to alongside. So and that's for me, Philip. So yeah, really fascinating, really interesting. We've also touched quite a bit on the importance of the practical that comes through coaching as well, through the complex. So maybe as we draw the conversation to a close, if there was a practical piece of advice either you wish you'd had, or that knowing where you are now and where you're going, you would love to give to coaches, what would it be?
Well, can I do two?
Sure.
I think the first thing is that you're running a business, and that the purpose of a business is to grow clients. So there needs to be a plan around how you're going to grow clients. And it ain't complicated, actually. We've sort of touched on it. I think referral is the most powerful one. And then you could go with somebody else who's sold it, and they know what you do. You could, piggyback that. That would be a bit of flow of work, less money, but But I think the thing I would say is don't be too much of a hurry to get into the dog kennel, the niche. I would let it evolve and see, and also it may change. It may be. I mean, I know people who've got huge heart for neurodiversity, for example, so that's an area of focus for them, and they're wonderfully effective in that space. I would let it, but it needs to be something that catches this. Something you care about, and obviously something you know about. And then be able to think, well, knowing what I know now, where might I focus for the next year? One thing that I found very helpful with this, I added OKRs, objectives and key results, to my practice as a coach. So this is what Google adopted very successfully from a very small company of 60, and they've always used it. And what that really is objective. What is the bigger desired outcome? Probably qualitative for this. There might be 1, 2, or possibly 3 of those. And then what needs to be in place? So if you just took that back into your coaching practice, and the cadence for an OKR is 12 months. So it's 12 months and 3 months, which is brilliant. So in the next 12 months, what is my desired outcome? What's my objective, key objective? And as measured by. That's what these are. These are key results. There might be 1, 2, or 3 of these. And I would do that, actually. And you can Google OKRs. There's a good YouTube thing by the guy. Measure What Matters is the book that was the sort of seminal work. But it's very simple. But the review is every week. You're saying, right, next week, how am I going to move the needle on the key results? What's my activity? And that's your 2 days. I am going to go to a networking thing and talk to 6 people, it's an action. So this is the gut bit. And then just see what happens, and then see what's working, see what works. But because you've done that, you've seen it out there, you can visibly see what's working more and and then we'll do more of it, and then every 3 months, you review. So you've got a set of 3-month things you're going to get done, objectives, key results, and the annual. Underneath your overarching aim of who you are. So my overarching OKR was, I have actually changed it slightly, but was free the slaves. I think we've created organizations that are slave-like. And that what we need to do as coaches is help free them to be who they are and focusing on what matters. But in real terms, it's about sustainable income. How can I create flow of work? What am I going to focus on to do it? And it will be about those things. So having a list of people to contact and being in contact with, ask for referrals, have some stories of what's worked. I don't know. Is that helpful?
Certainly is for me. No, I think really interesting in both that take the time to find the niche. Well, really, it's finding your place, taking your place once again. Yeah.
Could I could write a book about that? Oh, sorry.
It also reminds me that we could probably have another conversation all about niche, because I've really barely scratched the surface on that, but that'll have to be another time for them. Before we do wrap up, is there anything we haven't touched on that feels important to speak to?
No, except that it is a journey. It's in the title. So it ain't instant, it's enjoy the journey. I just think I think coaching there's lots of freedom in coaching. There's I don't know, I do feel that we sometimes trap it down into stuff, but there's a great community around it. It's important, and yeah, it's a terrible cliche, but enjoy the journey.
what better way than to end on a terrible cliche?
There's truth in cliches.
Yeah. But no, Philip, it's been a real pleasure. I, for one, have taken a lot away, both in terms of like models, lenses, approaches, but also, I think your kind of deep wisdom and sense of people. So yeah, really thank you very much for your time. And yeah, really looking forward to reading and hearing and seeing more about the Alongsider as it comes along.
Thank you very much. And I'd just like to finally just say thank you to all those that I've learned from Dr. Sally Vanson, from all of those people that have come alongside me and continue to do so. Put me in my place sometimes, which is fine, because we need to find that place, and then we do need to take it. So I think, it's been great fun. Thank you very much indeed.
Wonderful. Thank you, Philip.
Hi everybody, Robbie here, and just a few quick things to share with you before you go on to the rest of your day. Thanks for getting all the way to the end of the episode. I'm imagining that means that you think the work we're doing is important and valuable. We think so too. That's why I want to tell you about a way to support the coach's journey and get coaching from me on building your coaching business and be part of an amazing group of coaches. And that is join the Coach's Journey community. It's my flexible, affordable group coaching program for coaches. You pay between $20 and £100 a month and get access to a certain number of group coaching calls a year, plus some one-to-one time with me if you're a full member, and various other benefits. And of course, you get the chance to be connected to other amazing coaches on their own journeys too. You can join the community at thecoachesjourney.com/community. And if you want to get a flavour of the kinds of things we work on, the ways I think, then you can get my free ebook, An Introduction to the Coaching Business Flywheel, which boils down what I believe are the fundamental steps that every coach has to be taking to grow a sustainable business. You can find that at thecoachesjourney.com. It's also possible, if joining the community isn't right now, but you want to support the podcast, you can become a supporter of the show. Give us some financial support, get various benefits, and you can read loads more about that at patreon.com/thecoachesjourney. And if that's not right for you right now, but you do want to support us, please do click subscribe or follow wherever you're listening to the show. It really makes a difference to us being able to continue to make the show, keep going, keep it free, all those kind of things. Thanks so much to everyone who has supported the Coach's Journey over the years, but in particular, thank you to Alex Whitton, Alison Malone, David Norris, Jessica Jem, Linda Ransom, Lucy Braun and Rosie Stanbury for your ongoing support. Thank you too for listening, and we hope to have you back with us on the Coach's Journey podcast sometime soon.